Good morning, everyone, and welcome to REFU-Pod. This is the sixth day, because we started our interviews last week, and we are still continuing with the interviews this week up to Friday, which will lead up to the REFU-Pod Online Festival happening this Saturday at 6 p.m. So today we have some guests, others are coming, so we will just proceed as we wait for them to come. But basically, REFU-Poet is a space that uses art to tell refugee stories of trials and triumph. And what we have done in the past is just host artistic events on the World Refugee Day, where we bring together refugee artists and Kenyan artists to perform and just tell us what it is like to be in the shoe of a refugee. And this year, with COVID-19 happening and restricting, the gathering of people together, we thought it would be nice to have online conversations and just catch up with refugees during this time. And because of that, we've been having a series of online conversations, just trying to demystify the livelihood of refugees. And today we are having a discussion on education, refugees and education. And I have some panelists here. There is one more panelist who will be joining us in a few, who are going to just tell us education and how it works among the refugees. It is important that I let you guys know that if you have any questions, any comments, anything at all that you want to say or you want to direct either to REFU-Poet or to the panelists that we have today, you can do that through our comment section. Able to tell our panelists what you guys are saying. I can already see Bilbo Merilis. Bilbo is always there on time. Hello there, good to be here. Thank you for being here, Merilis. We hope to have a good time. We have one Kasaya Bramwell who is watching from Nairobi City. Kasaya Bramwell from Windle International. Karibu sana Kasaya. Hopefully we're going to have a good conversation, a good time, and learn actually. So I'm just going to allow my guests to introduce themselves, tell us who they are, what they do. Lawrence. Lawrence, please introduce yourself.
So hello everyone. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so my name is Lawrence Joroge. I work for an organization called Xavier Project. The full name is Francis Xavier Project. So we just call it Xavier Project. We are a mostly urban-based refugee education programming entity. So we support quite a number of refugee families and communities with regards to education. So we give scholarships to students in high school. We provide levies for kids in primary school, from ECD to primary school up to class 8. So we support in different ways. My particular role is capacity building. So I do teacher training. I do capacity strengthening of schools, boards of management, especially those with refugees, so that they can embrace more inclusive and safe learning for the children, both Kenyan and refugees. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Dominic, Karibu, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Faith. My name is Dominic Nyavuto. I work for Windle International Kenya. And basically, what Windle does is to offer education to refugees in the camp setup, and by extension to the urban setup. In the camp setup, we do offer education to the secondary students. And when we come to the urban setup, we also offer education to the tertiary level to individuals who are deserving. And so Window has really taken this passionately because there is a belief, it's amongst the ethos of Window that education is really one of the tools to transform the society, and that is why we've taken this for quite some time now. And basically, what I do in Window, I'm a scholarship officer with the Duffy Scholarship Office specifically. This is charged with the tertiary level education, and here we are looking at students whom we do enroll and oversee as they undertake their studies from various institutions, colleges, technical and vocational institutions, up to various universities across the country. Over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dominic. Let me just read a few comments from people who are joining us before I can start off this conversation. We have Mohammed Abdikadir who is saying, Mohammed watching from Hagadera, a student from Waberi Secondary. So you guys can tell me if you know Mohammed perhaps. We have Millicent Olo who says, looking forward to another great conversation. We have Christine Naishorua saying she's watching from Nairobi, from Windle International. Thank you all guys for being here. And so I would like to start off this conversation, and let me be a teacher. You've told us that you used to teach. I would just like to know, what does education encompass when we are talking about refugees and education? What would you define education to be?
Okay, hello once again. So the question is, what does education entail, particularly or with regards to refugees accessing it? Very well. From my experience and the experience at Xavier Project, refugees, naturally, and in terms of the various both the local and international laws and treaties, have a right to education. There are various, it has been very well documented that like refugees, just like any other, have a right to education. So with that kind of right, many refugees who come to Kenya and maybe other countries are able to join schools. I think Kenya has had a very inclusive atmosphere or situation, both politically and in terms of the communities. In most cases, refugees are able to quickly be supported to join schools, depending on their level. There are many challenges, perhaps that will come up later on, but I think majority of refugees are being able to access schools or education at various levels, with many challenges. Perhaps as we continue, these challenges will emerge.
Yeah. Yes. Let me just ask a follow-up question, Lawrence. When we are talking about education, is it just limited to school and going to class, learning English, math, science, chemistry, or is there more to education than just, that going to school?
Very well. I think our experience is that for refugees particularly, they come along with added needs. So your question is right. They just need basic literacy, which is very important. I'm aware, for example, refugees from DRC or Burundi, from Somalia or from South Sudan, they'll come to Kenya with language problems. So the language challenge becomes something to quickly be able to identify and address. So a lot of the programs we have the basic literacy as a starting point, um, particularly for refugees because they have that disadvantage. They come knowing French or Kirundi or Lingala or any other language from their home country. So basic literacy is a good starting point, along with other support systems such as psychosocial issues. So they're being supported to re-socialize, to to know their way around, to to get basic support, basic needs. Sure. So literacy, psychosocial needs, in some cases even help and coping mechanisms in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lawrence. Let me bring in Dominic. So, Dominic, you've said that Windle offers education to to refugees who are in camps. Let me start with the first one. You've said you offer education to those who are in camps. That is secondary school. So, I'm curious to know. Do you guys have schools? Do you construct schools in the camps, or do you partner with schools that are in the camps, or how does that work?
Very well, Faith. The model used by Windle in running and managing schools in the camp is a cost-sharing model whereby you realize that most of the schools in the camp, they are constructed by some partners, UNHCR being a major partner, and we have other development partners who have come on board. And these are the ones who are charged with the infrastructure of schools. And here I have to say that the government of Kenya doesn't contribute in the infrastructure of those schools. But then here, UNHCR and other development partners construct the schools. Then the management of these schools is left to Windle International Kenya, especially on the secondary sector. And here, what Windle does is to employ the teachers, and these are the teachers who will be responsible for imparting the national curriculum to the students of various nationalities. And basically, that is what happens. And additionally, we'll see some efforts by the Ministry of Education and the county governments of those host schools coming in also to support. One, they have given a conducive environment. The host communities have also supported in a number of ways, both directly and indirectly, to ensure that these refugees get education without disturbance. And we are seeing also other interested individuals coming on board to support either by direct interventions and indirect interventions, by donations, supporting in terms of books and learning materials and so forth. And that is the simple model that is used. Over.
Oh, thank you so much. Let me also ask another question on what you mentioned you do. You said you also offer tertiary education to the refugees who are in urban areas, and you mentioned that it is offered to those people who are deserving. The scholarships are offered to people who are deserving. So I would just like to know, who is a deserving refugee student?
Well, a deserving refugee student, maybe to clarify on this, the tertiary education is offered to both the camp-based and the urban refugees. At the end of it all, it will not be of use if we offer the secondary education and we do not offer transition path to these graduates. So we also support them to proceed to higher level institutions to pursue their studies. And this is where we come now. We combine the camp-based students and the urban-based students in the tertiary level. Now, when we talk of deserving students, we look at performance and rigor requirements. All students who have to be supported in this, they have to be legally registered by the UNHCR as refugees. And therefore, one can be academically talented but not legally registered. This one will not be an advantage to him. Neither can one be given these scholarships or be supported to pursue tertiary education without meeting the legal requirements. So both of them complement. We look at the legal requirement and the academic performance of these given students. Over.
Thank you so much, Dominic. So let me bring in Lawrence, and I'm glad to hear that at least there is a system that allows for, refugees to access both secondary and tertiary education. So Lawrence, let me ask you, do refugees have the same access to education, that is both, in high school and tertiary education, as Kenyan students do? Or you can highlight what are some of those challenges that hinder refugees from accessing the same education that Kenyans are exposed to? Karibu, Lawrence.
Very well, thank you. Good question, and perhaps a quick response could be yes and no, which is a bit vague. Yes, in many ways, as I already indicated earlier, Kenyan law is very clear. The Constitution, Basic Education Act, that all kids should be in school as long as they're in Kenya. It doesn't matter whether they're refugees. So by law, it's very clear that all children should be in school, and I think that kind of information should be, and we are actively sharing that kind of information through our capacity building with communities and schools and so on, so that refugees know that essentially they have no excuse not to have their kids enrolled in school. The law stipulates that parents will be taken to court if they don't enroll their kids in school, and that is regardless of their status. So, and so on and so forth, many statutes, including international agreements and so on, which safeguard the rights of all children to education. Having said that, the question is, do refugee children have the same kind of access as Kenyan children? And in many ways, yes. We work with over almost 100 schools in Kenya, mostly urban schools, both primary and secondary schools. We are supporting about 500 children from ECD to class 8, supporting their primary school levies. So you can see the first challenge that they have that makes them not be able to access is the fact that as much as the education is theoretically free, free in theory, free in quotes, there are so many other costs for exams, for lunch, for supplies and so on, for paying for the security people in the schools. So there are always little bits of costs which put away many children, including Kenyan students, Kenyan children. And I think refugees are more likely to be affected because they can't afford those extra levies, whether it's 100 per week or 200 for exams every other time. So we support in a small way to take care of those costs for about 500 refugee children from ECD to class 8, and full scholarships for over 200 in between Form 1 and Form 4. And that helps take care of, let me use the word a small percentage, because I'm sure there are many others who are missing out. Look at our database, the number of applications by very far, what we are contributing is still very small. So we are aware that there are many children at home because of school fees or levies. So cost is one. Perhaps the other thing is documentation. We are doing urban refugee education support. Quite a number of refugee families are forced to leave the camps and come to the urban areas, Nairobi, Nakuru, Mombasa, Bungoma, and so on. Statistics show that there are over 60,000 urban refugees, a big percentage of whom do not have a proper documentation to be in Nairobi or in Mombasa to be provided for, because ideally the ratio or the provisions are supposed to be in the camps. So they are usually left unattended to. And so that kind of the documentation aspect is a big hindrance, even as we are enrolling them in school or trying to get them some support or registering for examinations or other services. Documentation is a big issue. And I think there is a whole other area of challenges, particularly urban refugees will face, very likely even perhaps Dominic and others who have more experience in the camps will attest to.
Yeah. And I think I would like to also bring in Dominic to just tell us what are some of those challenges that hinder refugees from accessing education. And before you do so, Lawrence has mentioned the issue of documentation. And we had this discussion earlier in the week, and we learned that a refugee only needs either an asylum pass or a refugee ID in order to move around and even access essential services. So when we say that there's a challenge of documentation, what are these other documents that refugee students need in order for them to access education? Dominic?
Very well. Having listened to Lowlands, I think at some point there is a like a distinction between, I might say at some point, the challenges that Lowlands has displayed might not really affect us, especially considering we have the two levels of education that we do look at. I'm saying this because if you look at our secondary level education, which is based in the camps, issues of documentation are not as per se a real challenge, because most of these students, all of them, so long as they have been accepted by the UNHCR as refugees, they do get education without any challenge. So accessibility to them is not really a challenge. Perhaps it only crosses to the urban setup where it causes a problem. Now, coming to our secondary level, our tertiary level, that is where to some extent we do experience some challenges with documentation, and some of these are twofold. We have statutory requirements where sometimes you find our students, before they travel to their institutions, they need documents like, for example, a movement pass. Sometimes these act as a hindrance, where if they do not apply for them in good time, they end up delaying. If and these affect their reporting times to school. Sometimes we've had cases where students delay in requesting for them because it's also a process. If they do not request for them in time, the issuance time also gets them off guard, and therefore you realize that they are affected. Two, we also have academic documentations whereby you realize that we have students who do not all have not studied for their secondary level education. They have not studied in the country, and therefore what happens, even as they come asking and requesting for support in the tertiary level education, we do experience challenges with their academic documents, because one, our level, our academic curriculum does not match with theirs. So it requires that, again, they have to be subjected to equation. So most of these documents have to be equated. Sometimes we've had scenarios whereby you'll find that a potential student comes requesting only to find his academic document does not tally or does not qualify to put him, even, for example, to have him admitted to a first year uh, in any institution. So this is a challenge, and most of the time, some of them have been frustrated, and luckily to our psychosocial support partners, they have come in handy to support them. So that is the main challenge I can say on the need for equation, and also this is a cost. It's proving to be costly, having to have all those documents equated, and sometimes some have been told to go back to some classes. Maybe somebody will have a document that qualifies him to go back to maybe Form 3, and all that time it's really frustrating, but then with no option, they have to go and start from there for them to be supported in the tertiary level education. That is it from my side.
Yeah. And I don't know, let me ask you this still, Dominic. For
Yeah.
what you're mentioning is there's a very high possibility that young refugees or these refugee students may not access education at all because of some of the hindrances. So what happens to these refugees? Let's say a refugee who, has come to Kenya, has not been able to go to high school, has not been able to go to, where do they go? Do they just stay in the camps? Do they find a way to urban areas, or what happens to them?
Very well. Education has two branches. We have the formal education and the informal education. The formal education is what we are looking at, people going to classes to study basic skills, basic knowledge and skills. But then we have also the informal branch of education, whereby people need not to go to study math, science, and all those. Rather, here we have some other partners who do the livelihoods. As Lawrence mentioned earlier, we do have the livelihood programs in the camps, and even as we talk, there are also others in the urban setup. And most of these students, they are encouraged to go to those institutions or to those organizations to register for such programs. Some of them might be very good in craft courses. They are encouraged to enroll, and at the end of it all, one will get the requisite knowledge and skills that he or she wants without really having to go through the formal education system.
Thank you, Dominic. Let me pass this question also across to Lawrence. Perhaps you can shed some more light on what opportunities are there for refugees who, one, have finished, they've gone through all education levels. What opportunities are there for them, and what opportunities are there for these refugee students who were not fortunate enough to access these different levels of education.
Okay, very well. So the question is, what opportunities exist for refugees at different levels? Yeah, and I think Dominic has shared very, very well and comprehensively. I
Lawrence, I think you're breaking a little bit.
Am I on? Please confirm. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think.
Hello?
Yeah, you are audible, you are clear.
Oh, I see. Very well. Sorry.
What did you say, Dominic?
I can hear
Okay.
him. He was worried.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sorry. So saying like to address one component, I usually unattended group of young people who left their countries as refugees or otherwise, and they find themselves, between borders and missing on education for 2-3 years, even more. So we have a program called Accelerated Education Program, or AEP. It targets youth between 14 years and early 20s. We have a center in Kitengela, another one in Isli, another one in Umoja. Yeah, we're also supporting quite a number in Kakuma as well, through community-led organizations or CBOs. We strongly believe that when communities can take charge of their lives, it's more effective and more efficient. So this program called AEP, Accelerated Education Program, targets between 14 and 20 something, early 20s, who would possibly have been about finishing their high school or in college, but they find themselves crossing borders and missing out on education. And so we give them a second chance. They do an accelerated program. Instead of doing 8 years, we're able to support them go through an education system that does between 2 and 4 years instead of 8 years. So we do an assessment of where they should be. You can imagine a 17-year-old girl or 18-year-old girl who, after the assessment is placed at class 4. It's really unfair and not really moral to take her to the average class, Moja or Isli, when she's really a young woman, so to say, sitting in class with fellow class 4 in the Kenyan system. So that's how we try to address that. So we have centers where the accelerated program takes place. And I think this has helped so far over 200 in the last 3 years. Go through that. We've had about 50 of them sit for their KCPE. Last year we had 20 something. The other year we had another 19 or so. And many of them are in secondary school now, in their early 20s, but being able to try and live up to what their dreams were. So part of the challenge is that the accelerated program is not very well entrenched into our system, into our policies. So it's still not, I would say, a completely accepted, I would say, avenue for education. But we are experimenting on it and it's really working very well. Perhaps apart from the age issue, you've captured the idea of age issue. Then, there are other things such as discrimination in schools, safety, culture issues, psychosocial issues, which already came up. For discrimination, we've been trying to empower schools through teacher training, training of the boards of management, school communities and local communities, through workshops, through just having sessions so that they can come up with proactive measures to ensure there's peace and coexistence. Many schools that we work with organize cultural days. I would be happy if you point. One of these days we hook up and we use your skills as well so that culture days in schools help children celebrate each other's culture and embrace each other. Sure. So I don't know whether I need to say more than that in terms of opportunities. We are doing ECD, primary and secondary. We don't do college for now, but we help children or students try to look for pathways through partners such as Windle International, through JRS and other partners.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. And let me just acknowledge that, as part of people who are watching, I can see that there are various students, and I'm guessing that they're either affiliated with Windle or Xavier. You guys will let me know. But I can see Martin Mwangi is tuned in. Thank you. Omeka Nyakundi, thank you. Joyce Koto, thank you. Rachel, Stephanie, thank you. I have someone called Akot Kwol watching from Eldoret, a student in JKUAT. And I also saw another student. So I would like to know, Akot, let me point you out. Do you have any testimony on your experience with either Windle or Xavier, or what has been your experience as a refugee student? Maybe you can share it on the post below. And please feel free to ask any questions that you would like to have answered on, by our panelists. But if there's any refugee student watching, I would really like to know what your experience has been like or is like. So when we were beginning, you mentioned that the government in the camps. So I'm wondering, what more should the government do to ensure that refugees have access to education?
Yes, Faith, I mentioned at some point that really on infrastructural development, the government has not come in. But then at some point, the two cannot be separated. The government has tremendously supported the education for refugees in the camps and even in the urban setup. We work closely with the Refugee Affairs Secretariat. You realize that this is the body that processes documentations regarding to the Aryan IDs, the movement passes. They really support these refugee students. As it stands, they cannot travel to urban institutions to study without documentation. So the government has really supported them greatly. Now, going to the camp setup, you'll also realize that the community has, through the government initiative and support, the community has hosted these given refugees, and that provision of that conducive environment itself is really supportive. Security is very paramount. The government has supported security to those refugee students, and it's really working very well because this education cannot really run without proper and adequate security. Not only that, through the Ministry of Education, I said refugees in the camp setup, they take the national curriculum and it is regulated by the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education also checks on the quality and standards through the quality assurance and standards. They check on the quality of education that is over to the refugee education, because at the end of it all, there is nothing that will differentiate a refugee student from a Kenyan student, because they receive the same knowledge, they
Hello.
are tutored by the same teachers, and therefore, really the government supports in a greater sphere for them to realize this education. Over.
Yeah, thank you. So from hearing you, it means that really the government is doing a lot to help, access to education for refugees. And I can see Jean is here. Let me allow Jean to introduce himself. Jean, if you can hear me, please would you introduce yourself? Yeah, I don't know if Jean can hear me, but I can get to him a bit later. But yeah, so there's something that Lawrence already touched on, and it's the issue of discrimination. And at REFU we carried out a literature competition earlier this year, and we just invited artists, not artists, writers, both refugee writers and Kenyan writers, to just talk to us about what it is like being a refugee. And in most of the scripts that we received, one thing stood out: it's discrimination in schools. That refugees, whenever they interact with Kenyan refugees in schools, they felt discriminated. And throughout these discussions that we've been having, we've figured that there's an issue of attitude. There's a way that Kenyans view, refugees to be like enemies. So they treat them as though they're here to take our opportunities, and they're not deserving of being here together with us. So I would like to pose this question both to Lawrence and to Dominic. How do we address this issue of discrimination of refugee students at school? I can start with Lawrence, perhaps.
Thank you. Perhaps I've shared a little about what we've been doing. I'm happy to say, like, as the education team at Xavier Project, and I'm in charge of capacity building. This constitutes strengthening the skills and knowledge of teachers and boards of management in over 50 schools in Nairobi. We've done trainings, and some of the good results of those trainings have been the development of internal policies, so that our partner schools are supported to develop proactive strategic development plans, very many of them, and that's part of the capacity building that the government should really come strongly in. Most schools don't know how to do strategic planning, especially strategic planning that has inclusive and safe learning environment as key, because safety is very important. Having a safe school environment is good for both Kenyans and particularly for refugees who are new, who don't know their way around, who may be discriminated. So we've seen schools come up with very proactive internal policies, such as, for example, providing incentives for teachers to do extra language lessons for Kiswahili or English for kids who've just come from different countries. So they help them in accelerating in terms of their language. They come up with policies to strengthen their guidance and counseling departments so that teachers are empowered to be able to have the skills to identify kids who may be suffering, both Kenyans and refugees, because we've seen that many children suffer in silence. They don't know how to express themselves, partly because of language, partly because of stigma. So being able to identify and come up with, ways to support them can help in solving that discrimination issue. So language, psychosocial support. I already talked about cultural days, peace clubs. These things are real. I attended one late last year before COVID came in a school called Kifaru in Umoja, one of our big partner schools. They've got almost 500 refugee children in one school. Almost a quarter of the school of the school actually is refugees. That's a school called Kifaru, another one called Bondeni in Umoja area. They're in close proximity. You can see between two schools, they have about 700 refugee kids from Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Burundi, Rwanda. And you see, those schools have embraced refugees. They have a very inclusive and safe learning space. You'll be surprised that because of that and because of other efforts by teachers, like Kifaru Primary School was ranked number 2 in last year's KCP in Embakasi sub-county. And see, you can see if schools and communities embrace or have an inclusive and safe learning environment, there's no fear that standards will go down. Actually, they will go up because the celebration of everyone, by everyone. So basically that. Perhaps I could add with regard to policies by government. There are some draft guidelines on admission of non-citizens, including refugees. It's something you can look up, guidelines on admission of non-citizens, including refugees. I think it's a very good document. It's quite proactive regard to the whole process of accepting refugees, the paperwork, the documentation, how these need to be supported. It is still not official, that's the problem. So we are still using that to encourage schools to, to bring in refugees without any fear. There's also the refugee policy. I think there's still a document, the new refugee education policy in Kenya, but it's not formally signed yet. It's still, I think it's in draft stage. It contains most of the things we are talking about. So we hope in the coming days, if not so long from now, that policy document will become law and refugees can feel well protected and well provided for.
Yeah, I think before I ask Dominic to also share with us how do we deal with this issue of stigma and discrimination. I had earlier asked a court to just share with us her experience, and she says this: my experience as a refugee student is that I have been able to be given the opportunity to study in a government university despite of where I come from. despite of where I came from, girls are meant to be married and bring cows. I'm really happy for the chance, and I will be able to be a role model to my fellow sisters in my community. About discrimination, I have been through it when I was in my first year, and reason is because in my department there was no South Sudanese girl, but I really never gave up standing as a black girl. So I thank you so much, Akot, for sharing your experience. And you can see that she also experienced a bit of discrimination, but she's happy that at least she's been able to have an opportunity at a government university to be able to learn and become a role model. Thank you so much, Akot. So Dominic, let me ask you, how do we deal with the issue of stigma and discrimination amongst refugee students?
Very well, Faith. I think it will be good for us, first of all, to understand why discrimination, why is it in schools and in various institutions? And the very straightforward answer that we'll see is, there is competition for resources. Some of the students, the host students, at some point they will feel the refugee students have come to take our resources. One, they might be struggling. Maybe the student numbers in classes are searching up. And when they add to the refugee numbers, the same trend continues. And therefore, at some point, I think it's normal for such a reaction to take place. However, what matters is how we handle this. And one of the surest ways to handle this, as already Lawrence has said, we have policies in place which are coming up. Not only that, we've had principals, administrators of a number of institutions which have really embraced refugees. Why are they embracing them? You realize with the time that most of these refugees are really talented. They are super when it comes to games, for example, and they have really shown a lot of right to most of those given schools. Some schools have had to proceed to high level competitions because of these refugee students and because of what they have shown to come with, not as a burden, but they also come with talents. Most schools have embraced them. I think early this year, there was an event whereby some heads of institutions were rewarded for extending a helping hand towards the refugees, supporting them and accommodating them. I think this is one of the approaches, if well embraced, we can really tackle the issue of discrimination, accept the refugees as other students, value them with their diverse talents, and also reward and support those people, those administrators who are willing to accommodate them. And in so doing, even you realize none will be talking about discrimination. However, it might be real. I've already said the root cause of this. But going forward, the government is really supporting on policy formulations. UNHCR and the other partner agencies are also really supporting. At the end of it all, we'll have a platform where all these issues are handled. I'm happy to realize that even a vice cannot be solved without being brought out. It also takes the victims to come out and report. Through the reporting, you realize that this can be handled. But if there is discrimination that is not reported, sometimes it becomes a challenge. I have to say that it is real, it is happening, the reason I've given, but then there are good efforts to combat that. Over.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I can see a question from Omeka Nyakundi, which I would also like to add to, and perhaps Dominic, Lawrence, you could help us with this. Omeka says, I am a resident of Kitengela. How may I plug in when I have free time at the center you said you have in Kitengela? Kitengela. And also on top of it, I would just like to know, how can Kenyans, normal Kenyans, assist in the quest to educate refugees through your organization?
Thank you, Omeka Nyakundi. Happy to see that you're in Kitengela. We have a center in Kitengela. Currently, because of COVID-19 issues, it's closed. So we are supporting about 200 kids and students in Kitengela remotely now through WhatsApp groups, SMS, podcasts. And I'm very happy to hear that you could plug in and possibly support in different ways. If you're able to get my contact, I'll send you the number of our resident teacher, their teacher Anlet, who is not on this call. She's coordinating the learning there. I only support and supervise, but for now we are doing remote learning support. So I don't know how I could get Omeka Nyakundi. Maybe does he have access to my number, Faith?
Yes. I think I personally know Omeka Nyakundi, so
Okay.
we can link him with you after the end of this stream. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me ask you another question as well,
Yes.
coming from Mary Liz, and she asks, how are you incorporating mental wellness for the refugees to be in a good headspace to enhance them in maximizing on getting more out of education, given the type of trauma that most refugees deal with?
Okay, very well. For Xavier Project, our specialization is education. We believe in inclusive education offered in safe spaces. So that's a good question. All our centers are ideal safe spaces for learning. So both physically and in terms of the policies we have for social emotional protection of the children, we have good policies in place for to ensure that the place is safe, both physically and using social emotional learning skills. We use a learning tool called ILET, I-L-E-T, Improving Learning Environments Together. It's something you can look up, along with UNICEF child-friendly schools protocols to ensure that our spaces are safe. And that's the same kind of training we do with all our 100+ partner schools. Perhaps with regard to Mary Liza's question, how do we incorporate mental wellness? As I've already alluded, our teachers are training being able to recognize or identify early signals such as withdrawal, for example, or hyperactivity. And such children, if it's, I would say, mild, if it's something usual, common, it's attended to because our teachers are trained in basic guidance and counseling. But we also have our partners such as HIAS, who we do the referrals to. You know HIAS, sort of our big partners. There is Refuge Point as well. Yes, all those big partners who engage in, say, closer psychosocial issues, if they are big. I'm aware of one girl who had big issues in Umoja area, would just faint, couldn't concentrate in class. So we took close attention and she was referred to the highest Umoja branch. And it was bigger than we thought. She was referred actually to Mathare. It was a psychiatric case. Her systems would just shut down and not come to the learning center for weeks. Yeah. So those are big concerns, and we are happy to have partners. If anyone here is in any of the centers where we are, we'd be happy to benefit from your skills if you're able to volunteer. So perhaps, Faith, you will help do some networking so that perhaps people can also give time to support in one way or another. Okay?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to invite Desmond to perhaps read what's going on in the comment section as I try and connect with Jean to get him back to the stream. Desmond.
Thank you so much, Atieno. So I'll just read some of the comments that have been shared in the comment section. And one is from Mohammed Abdul Kadir, and he says to Nawakilisha Windle Trust Kenya Nairobi office. And there's also Mohammed Abdul Kadir. I think they are two different people because they're two different profiles. And he's saying, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to expose two things here. I don't know other camps, but in Dadaab, I observed three major challenges to students in high school. Number one is poor performance in their national exams. This is tremendous challenge, obviously. It's becoming endless, which is turning into you may find it's becoming an endless challenge. You may find a school handling a number of 200 candidates. Out of this number, 75% of the students in the national exam. The other challenge, give me a second. The other challenge is inadequate classrooms. It seems, I think the comment is cut. I'm not able to see the entire comment. Sorry for that. Anyway, I'll just come back to Mohammed. I'll go to Kasaya Bramwell, and he says discrimination is a natural human social survival phenomenon. It only finds different expressions in different social contexts. The most recent being, I can't breathe. What's important is how to build capacity in our communities, as said by Lawrence, to identify its manifestation and address it in such a way that our resources are shared equitably. Omeka Nyakundi says, I am certain we will link up. I think that's a follow-up to the initial conversation that we're having about Kitengela office. Yes. Back to Atieno as I sort out the other issues.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that session. I would just like to perhaps just go back to the comment by Mohammed, and he raises quite a number of issues. Perhaps Dominic and Lawrence, you could comment. We could start with Dominic. The first issue, it says poor performances in their national exams. So what do you have to say about that, Dominic?
Very well, Faith. I think Mohammed's point is it's a cycle. When we have the populations going higher and you realize that the support systems are not satisfactory. Like, I mean, here, you'll find that the numbers are too high, the facilities are not enough. It leads to a larger extent to poor performance. All other factors held constant. I have to acknowledge that one of the greatest challenges education to refugees is facing is the supply that is so limited against the demand. There is a very high demand for education and the supply is limited. With this, you realize that it poses a challenge. And that is why you realize that we have very many students who are in need of education. UNHCR and the partner agencies themselves, they have done their level best, but then they do not have sufficient resources to handle all the needs. And that is why we are experiencing a scenario like what Mohammed is mentioning. On the side of performance, I think it is deep than that. And what is being done, for example, Windle is really trying to support the learners by ensuring that they have the right resources. Resources here go to books and all those, and plus giving and recruiting more qualified staff. There are a number of challenges, especially on the very high numbers, which are really contributing to this low performance. But I hope this is something that can be solved over time, even as we try to address these supply and demand issues. Over.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you so much. I don't know, do you have anything to add on that particular point, Lawrence? On the point of, poor performance?
Hello. Yeah, we are in an exam-oriented system. I've been a teacher, as I said earlier, and it's pressure, pressure, pressure. Sometimes students can't breathe, as Kasaya said. I think Dominic has said, great things about the support system in our schools. In an ideal situation where teachers and school communities have the relevant empowerment and incentives, and this may include, enough resources, good timetabling, so that teachers can offer remedial and catch-up, language support, psychosocial. It's a whole array of things. If they're put in place, refugee kids can do very much as well as Kenyan kids. A lot of the partner schools we have, including the ones I mentioned in Umoja area, some of the top students are actually refugees. They've managed to get scholarships, they've managed to go places, and so poor performance is not really, I would say, a factor just for refugees. It's a factor for all children and students who are in situations which disadvantage them. And of course, refugees are more likely to have more disadvantages. But when they're empowered, when their basic needs have been addressed, when teachers embrace them, they do very, very well.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. So we are almost winding up, and I would like to request Mohammed Abdikadir. I think your comment got cut off somehow, so we are not able to see comments, especially where you say number 2. The other challenge is inadequate classrooms. It seems this problem, and then that's where it cuts off. So if you're able to finish that bit of your comment, we can read it. But I would like to ask a question that's coming from Googs Ngugi. Googs Ngugi, sorry. Desmond?
Yes, I got the whole comment from Mohammed. I think I can just read it out. So yeah, can you hear me? Atieno. Oh, so I think we have lost Atieno. So can you hear me? Okay, so I'll just read the second comment that Mohammed had raised, and he's saying that the second thing that is actually affecting most of the refugees so I'll just redirect from his comment. The other thing is inadequate classrooms. It seems this problem is not discussed anywhere. You may find high school students who are like between 80 and 150 students occupying one classroom. I think I'm going to let Dominic comment on that. The third challenge is the language problem. He says majority of the students in Dadaab cannot use Kiswahili fluently, not because they hate, but the environment they are dwelling and the community that they are in are not using Swahili. So you can see how it's very difficult for them to adjust with the language. They need thorough attention and aid in terms of language. Before now, I'll let Dominic answer that before I go to the last comment that Atieno was trying to read about from Ngugi. Oh shit. Dominic, we can't hear you.
Dominic is muted.
Yeah.
It's okay now?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, we can hear you now.
Well, it's because Faith had been lost. Now, what I was saying,
I'm so sorry.
yeah. I think the issue of infrastructure, as I said before, it's about the very high demand against the limited supply. And there is always a continuous call for more support to enhance education to the refugees. And these are whole spectrum, infrastructure and human support. Now, on the side of language, I am very aware that Kiswahili is a problem amongst the students in Dadaab. Not only in Dadaab, even if you go to Kakuma, that is the same scenario. Most of the students, when they come from their countries, and Kenya being Kiswahili is a language of instruction, not really, sorry, it's a language among the languages being taught, they have a great challenge. I think one, it goes to the mindset. There are students, even as we speak, who have embraced the language, they have changed their mind, and they have done excellently well. They have performed well with the same language. The organization is doing quite great. There are more teachers who have been empowered to support the learners. And I call upon the learners also to try and utilize the various resources available, the teachers who have been brought on board, the various books which they have been given at their disposal, and this will eventually change. Over.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask a question from Ngugi, and he says, my name is Googs, an artist. How can artists plug in helping refugees in schools or even outside to learn more about music, drums, or even cultures? We feel there is much we can do if we get plugged in, but I'm enjoying the conversation. Yes. Do you want to say something about that, Dominic, or
Well, I think I can. You know, learning is a continuous process, and education itself is not complete. We also need to look at other spheres of learning. art is one of them. And I can say, I think it goes back to our discussion. Most learners, not all of them are really talented very much academically to perform to the best expectations of majority. But then they have other hidden talents which they can work on. And this goes to where now they can be supported to nurture their talents. I'll ask Ngugi to try, for example, during some of these days, the schools have cultural days and cultural events, to come and showcase his platform, talk to the learners, and I'm sure he cannot miss that given platform. Most of these students, they have talents, but they lack the information on how to develop them. And I think Ngugi comes at the right time here. If well supported, then the students can get the right match from him. Over.
Just before I allow in Atieno, I'll ask my last question, and it's from Mercy Kaleche. She's like, I'm enjoying the conversation so far. I'd love to know how I would plug in to engage refugees, to engage with refugees. I am a resident of Rwanda, so I think that's open to anyone who might have ideas on how to help reach people in Rwanda.
To learn something? Well, from the look of things, it's like, well, Mercy, you know, technology has brought us, it has made the globe to be like a village. And I think we can have the support of Mercy with the will. We can easily, through, for example, this platform, Mercy can give her contribution in a number of ways. Not even to mention, Windle is extending its branch to Rwanda, but this is not for, it's not final. And once that is available, once we have operations fully functional in Rwanda, then I think we can have Mercy coming in to support refugees. But still, there are very many platforms where the support for refugees can be offered too.
Atieno.
Yeah, I don't know. Did Lawrence have anything? Do you want to say anything on that? How she can plug in?
Wow, thank you, Mercy. I was not sure whether she's a resident of Rwanda in Kenya or actually residing in Rwanda, but whatever the case, as Dominic has indicated, there's so much help that can be given or come our way, even remotely. For example, Atieno, if you're able to coordinate us so that we come up with another forum where we can get all those extra pairs of hands and minds and good psychosocial and other resources, including Ngugi the musician. Yeah, I would be happy if Mercy can join one of my very active WhatsApp group supporting class 8 girls with mentorship, for example, and other ways.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence, for that. Yeah, I think I will link all of us. I will link Googs, I will link Nyakundi and Mercy together because they have all shown interest. And I'll link them with Lawrence and also with Dominic so that we can see how we can plug in and assist in our various capabilities. I apologize for escaping for a few seconds. But I can see a quote says that it's a true fact that Mr. Dominic has just said about language, especially in Kakuma, you find that one is in Form 4 but can't talk Kiswahili. It's a mindset that where I came from, we never used to speak Swahili, and that attitude continues. Thank you. So thank you all who have shared your thoughts on our comment section. Thank you to all of you guys who have watched this stream from the beginning to the end. Again, we would never do this without you guys. And Another way in which you can support refugees is by just showing up. And by showing up, I mean, for example, with the World Refugee Day that we are having this Saturday, and we are celebrating refugees using art, poetry, music, and dance. It would be really amazing if you would join us and just listen. You know, sometimes what refugees actually need is to be heard. And it would be really amazing if you would plug in on our Facebook, on our YouTube, on our Instagram at REFU-Poet, and enjoy, you know, some art that they will be sharing. So before I leave, I can see Rachel says, the mention of the WhatsApp group has tickled my fancy. I would love to engage in the same. I go by Spontaneous the Poet. Yes, I will also include Rachel, Stephanie in the conversation. And anyone else who would like to be part of that WhatsApp group or would like to plug in, please do tell us. So at this juncture, I would like to say thank you. Thank you so much, Dominic. Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence has also escaped a little. Thank you, Jean. Although Jean was not able to join us throughout the conversation, we still thank you. And yeah, let's meet again here tomorrow, same time at 11. Thank you guys so much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.